Hey, this is manic.mercurian, and today we're talking about the week forecast for Monday, March 10th through Sunday, March 16th, 2025. This is by far the biggest week of the year so far, and it may even be the biggest week of the entire year of 2025. And the reason why is because of this full moon lunar eclipse that I'm sure you've heard about by now. It's happening this week, either the night of Thursday, March 13th, or very early Friday, March 14th, depending on your time zone. But you can see in this image here exactly where it will be visible. And so regardless of where you are listening from, you will still experience this eclipse astrologically, of course. But this may be even more intense for those of us listening from North America and parts of South America. So I find that very interesting, as if there isn't already enough going on in North America right now. Let's add an eclipse. Why not? So again, in case you were wondering, for almost everyone in North America, and again, parts of like Western South America, you'll be able to see this either late on Thursday the 13th or early on Friday the 14th. But you can also see, if you are tuning in from somewhere else, you can see, based on this image, kind of when you can expect to see this eclipse if you want to see it. But what does this mean? What does this mean for us astrologically? This total lunar eclipse, let's actually leave that video, that image there. I think that's better. This full moon total lunar eclipse is happening at 23 degrees Virgo. So it's the full moon at 23 Virgo is opposing the sun at 23 Pisces. So I always talk about, whenever, really with any full moon, including an eclipse like this, it's not just about the sign that the full moon is in. So in this case, it's not just about 23 degrees Virgo. Like, of course, that is a huge focal point. That is the focal point in many ways. If you do have placements around that point, they're going to be intensely affected by this, and there's going to be some kind of culmination for you. But it's not just about 23 Virgo. A full moon, it's an opposition. It's the moon opposing the sun, right? The moon would have no light. We would have no light if it weren't for the sun. So I really view full moons in general as oppositions. It's the opposition between the sun at 23 Pisces being opposed by the moon at 23 Virgo. So what does the Pisces Virgo axis really have to do with? This is intense, and this is very heavy. Virgo is the sixth sign, and its job is basically to integrate the first half of the zodiac. Pisces is even more intense, maybe deeper or heavier, because its job is to integrate the entire zodiac, the entire cycle, and to prepare for an entirely new cycle. So combining both of these signs through this axis, it's going to bring about a lot of themes involving integrating, processing. I think this is even more true with Venus recently retrograde as well. I think we're rethinking a lot of our relationships socially, but also relationships to our investments. Like, where do we get our joy from? Where do we get our abundance? Whether that be through wealth or relationships, like, how are we supporting ourselves? We may need to rethink these areas. So this eclipse comes and it kind of riffs off of that and says, we really are reaching a tipping point when it comes to how we are processing everything. I'll talk a little bit more about that once we get through the day by day. There is a very interesting aspect that this eclipse makes to Uranus, so we will break all that down in this forecast. But I also wanted to mention there's another major event happening this week, as if that weren't enough. Mercury does station retrograde only one day after the eclipse. So there's a huge change coming this week with the eclipse and with Mercury stationing retrograde at 9 degrees Aries on Saturday. That is so very interesting because Venus just stationed retrograde at 10 degrees Aries on March 1st, which was also a Saturday. And then 2 weeks later, on the dot, Mercury stations retrograde at almost the same exact degree. So if you do have placements around 9 or 10 degrees Aries, that's another huge focal point here. So again, that would be 23 Virgo or Pisces. Do you have placements around those 2 points? Or 9 or 10 degrees Aries, do you have placements there? Basically, I'm going to keep this really broad for this kind of intro part. But if you do have placements around any of those three degrees of Virgo, Pisces, or Aries, that's going to be immensely changed for you. So, for instance, if your sun is at one of those places, your ego, your identity are going to go through a lot of changes starting this week. You know, if it's your moon, it's your core personality, your emotions, your core identity. If it's your midheaven, it's your career and reputation that are changing, etc. You know, you can also look to the house placements. You can always like ask me in the comments for specific kind of advice or information as well, or get a reading from me. But yeah, in general though, regardless of your astrology, we're all going through huge changes this week. Before I get into the day-by-day forecast, I did want to cover some recent developments as well. So Mercury is freshly in Aries. Mercury just entered Aries last Monday, the 3rd of March. So this is a pretty happy sign for Mercury to be in. Of course, Mercury is in the pre-shadow for most of the week before it does station retrograde. So Mercury is intensifying. It's slowing down. It's preparing to go retrograde this week. And that means that the information and the communication are intensifying. The slower a planet moves, the more intense it is, okay? So Mercury, although it typically travels very fast, it's slowing down, you know, just like Venus has recently as well. So it's very strange. Like Mercury and Venus typically are among the fastest planets, but now, you know, this is not the case at all this week. They're both traveling very slow. Venus, which just recently stationed retrograde, and Mercury, which is just about to. So I think we're really taking a much heavier look at a part of our lives which is not typically heavy. You know, Mercury and Venus are usually about, you know, the daily rhythm to things, the errands, the information, the communication with Mercury. And then Venus, again, is more about abundance and fun and joy. You know, these are usually lighter things. Like, it's not such a big deal. You know, these are day-to-day issues. But again, right now, it's not so casual. We're taking a much heavier look at these parts of our lives and really rethinking all of this. Like, you know, am I actually acting in the most efficient way? Is there a better way I can express myself? Is there a better way I can manage my abundance or maybe make more money, or, you know, something like that? Is there a better way I can express my maybe romantic feelings or love in any of its forms? All of these things are, you know, there's just so much going on right now. It's hard to even dial down, but yeah, these are among some of the things that we are processing this week. Okay, let me review my notes. I do have a lot of notes for this week. So Venus recently retrograde. Oh, in case you're wondering, Venus does station direct on April 12th at 24 degrees Pisces. So we still have quite a bit of time. We have the rest of the month, basically like a whole month from this week for Venus retrograde. Venus retrograde is so rare, by the way, and it's especially interesting before Mercury stations retrograde on Saturday the 15th. Venus is the only planet retrograde, which is just so wild to me because Venus retrograde is the rarest of all the retrogrades. Venus spends the least amount of time retrograde. So to have all the other planets direct with Venus retrograde, it's very strange. It's very different. It's just, you know, Venus is a planet that typically has to do with stability. It's constantly moving, you know. So it's very unusual that it does. I mean, it's not unheard of. These things happen. They have their own rhythm, as you know, but Venus retrograde, it is rare though. It's not often that we get this chance to rethink our relationships and our abundance. Okay, all that being said, let's dive into the day-by-day forecast, and yeah, let's get into it. We're going to see, basically what we're going to see is the build-up before the total lunar eclipse, and then there's going to be this change in the energy. That's a little bit vague, but that's the best way I can put it, because things don't necessarily die down after the full moon lunar eclipse. We still have another eclipse happening toward the end of the month, and then we're also going to dive into like the strangeness and the weirdness of Mercury retrograde too. So yeah, let's just kind of get into it and see how it goes, see how it plays out. So starting out with Monday, March 10th, moon is somewhat freshly in Leo, and I do notice there's a lot of fire and water right now, right? Sun, Saturn, North Node, Neptune, all clustered near the end of Pisces, Mars in Cancer. So we have like five placements, let's just say, since North Node is not a planet, 5 placements in these water signs, and then Chiron, Venus, Mercury, and the moon all in fire signs. So lots of fire and water. When you combine fire and water, you get steam. That makes things unclear. Our judgment is a bit clouded. We can't be so detached and so objective when there's all this fire and water energy. However, fire and water together is very creative. You have the warmth of the fire with the nourishment of the water, and so there's just so much creativity. This is something I kind of talked about in my I drew a tarot card for this week, and I got the Pisces card of inspiration. I feel like there's just so many different ideas and so many different feelings, so many different timelines that are all possible right now. Like we're on this, like some people have described this like merging of the timelines, where many timelines are coming together right now, and then many are about to split from this moment as well. We're at this kind of crossroads, so to speak. So anyway, so that has something to do with all this fire and water. Combining all the fire and water, these are the two most passionate, most spirited and emotional elements. So there's so much power in that, so much enthusiasm. But on the other hand, you could describe this as like kind of like hitting the gas and the brake at the same time, or hitting the gas with all these fire placements, hitting the brakes with all the water placements. All these water placements in general are more about, like, let's go within, let's really feel things out. But the fire placements want to go forward. One exception to that would, of course, be Venus retrograde, which is Venus retrograde in Aries is almost, in a way, it's almost kind of acting like a dysfunctional Libra, sort of. It's still a cardinal energy, but it's focused on Aries themes of, self-expression and independence, but it's doing so in a more kind of backward, introverted or retrospective kind of way. So yeah, really there's so much going on. I can't possibly hope to like wrap up all these themes together for you, but I'll do my best. But yeah, so much fire and water. I see so much creative energy that it might be scary. Like, I think there's a reason why we don't, most of us, almost all of us, we don't completely know how to manifest. We can't instantly manifest things, and I think that's for a reason. We're gonna see that reason right now. Like the potential to manifest is just so powerful right now that to me it's almost intimidating. Like anything you think of or anything that you fear can be created very quickly. So I think it's just very important to be mindful of your intentions. This is especially true because we're still technically in the first half of the lunar cycle, or in other words, we're still kind of building up to that full moon lunar eclipse. So again, it's just it's important to be mindful of your intentions. I think that's always true, but even more so with a day like today. In a more general perspective, I think for Monday, it's going to be, as I say, a crazy day. Like, you don't have to be into astrology to recognize that it's going to be a weird day. There's going to be a lot going on. There's going to be a lot of feelings kind of running rampant. Really the only planets that aren't in fire or water are Uranus and Taurus. So the only Earth placement that we have is Uranus, which is not happy there. Uranus is in fall in Taurus. So that's kind of telling. So in other words, there's basically nothing truly grounding us. You really can't rely on Uranus to ground you. And then otherwise, there's Pluto and Jupiter in the air signs. And in my opinion, neither of those are happy either. Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini, and I would argue that Pluto is in detriment in fall in Aquarius. So again, there's nothing supporting us in being objective or detached, and that's okay. That's not usually my forte personally, but it's just, sorry about that. It's just basically supporting us in, there's just so much creative energy. I really can't overstate that enough. Okay, but yeah, crazy day, lots of friction, lots of chaos. This is only going to build though. On the one hand, there's going to be chaos, but on the other hand, there's really so much potential to create something beautiful as well. It all just comes back to like the ability to manifest is so ripe, so potent right now. That sounds really great on paper, but it can also be messy, let's just say. in my opinion, the chart looks very similar for Tuesday. We still have Moon in Leo, so we're still building up in intensity, building up before that full moon lunar eclipse. So really, that kind of sets the vibe for most of the week. We're building, building, building. There's more and more intensity. We can all sense something is coming. Even, for those of us that, even people who aren't intuitive, even people who don't pay attention to cycles and patterns and astrology, everyone can feel something coming. So I would suspect that some people may be stressed or like fearful. I mean, can you imagine not knowing about this type of thing and going into it? But on the other hand, again, there's so much to be excited about right now, so much creation. Mercury does conjoin Venus today at 8 degrees Aries, which I find very interesting because, again, Venus just stationed retrograde at 10 Aries and Mercury's about to station retrograde at 9 Aries. So they have this kind of weird meeting point, only a degree or two away from both of their retrograde points. Venus, which has just recently stationed retrograde, Mercury, which is just about to. So it's very strange. Typically any kind of Mercury Venus aspect, I always call like dinner party energy. You have the communication and the conversation and the intellect of Mercury meeting the pleasantries, the pleasure, the enjoyment, the indulging of the senses of Venus. Okay, so that is still true here, but there are some very interesting kind of aspects to this aspect. So one would be that Venus is not being her normal self. Like, she's almost unrecognizable. Not only is she in detriment in Aries, but then again, of course, as I've said many times, she's also retrograde. So Venus is not this like normal love and light and, let's make everything pleasant. She's not her typical self. She's almost acting, like I said, she's kind of acting almost like Libra, or she's kind of acting like Mars though, in a way, being in Aries. Venus in Aries is out of place because Venus is all about love and connectivity, and Aries is all about the self. So really, I think we're kind of just taking it in and just saying like, hold on a minute, let me just focus on what I want and, self-love, that type of thing. That's what Venus is kind of focusing on right now. So Mercury comes along and says like, hi Venus, let's make this connection. They're kind of coupled or married temporarily. But again, they're just like, despite being conjunct and very much literally in the same place, in a different way, they are in very different places, if that makes sense. Venus has just retrograded, Mercury's just about to, and Mercury is much, much happier in Aries than Venus is. Mercury is in joy in the first house, which does have parallels to Aries, if that makes sense. I tend to take that kind of logical leap when it comes to the planetary joys. And so I view Mercury in Aries as the most fun transit, the most fun sign for Mercury to be in. I think this is because, Mercury has to do with, as you probably know, it has to do with the intellect and learning and thinking. And being in Aries, there's all the engagement that Mercury wants. There, Aries is so engaging, and there's so much new like stimuli to kind of chew on in Aries. But with Mercury in Aries, though, it's incredibly efficient, much more so than it typically is. It doesn't have to worry about all these little details. It can just focus on action and instinct. Mercury loves being in the Mars-ruled signs, Aries and Scorpio. There's so much, like I said, so much to chew on, so much that is engaging, so much stimuli. It's really almost like a vacation for Mercury. I think Mercury and Mars kind of admire each other. So anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but it's basically to say that Mercury is like having so much fun in Aries. It's like Disneyland or something, or whatever is a fun version of Disneyland. But yeah, they are meeting together. So I think this especially brings more focus to what have we kind of pulled back from when it comes to our love, pleasure, relationships, finances, etc. We've recently pulled back. We've recently started a new process of rethinking that, or rethinking our past relationships, past finance. How have we done things, and do we want to continue those? Maybe it's a time to think about it. Maybe it's a time to reconsider or strategize in a new way based on those past experiences. That's what's already been happening with Venus retrograde since the first of the month. But now with Mercury making this conjunction, it's just bringing our focus there even more. We may have more of a detailed kind of approach to this. And this may feel very heavy. Again, like I said earlier, Venus and Mercury are both basically stationary. They're acting a lot more like outer planets, if that makes sense. Like they're acting like, I don't know, any of the outer planets. Pick one. So in other words, like when it comes to our daily life, pleasure, abundance, finances, we may be taking a much like broader scope, like, you know, really thinking about the long term, like, you know, like what are my patterns? How have I, like, this is very psychological, very therapeutic in a way. You know, how have I dealt with my relationships? How have I dealt with my finances? You know, let me look at the patterns of how I've done things historically over the years, or maybe even over the decades. You know, is that truly what I want to continue? Do I want to change things in some kind of way? So that's very heavy. And on a normal week, that would be the biggest thing of the week. You know, that in itself is very heavy in my opinion. But we're only just getting started. Let's go to Wednesday, March 12th. So this is also very heavy. Lots of heaviness this week. What am I talking about? I'm talking about Sun conjoining Saturn at 22 degrees Pisces. I'll come back to that in a moment, but I just want to say this happens in the midst of Moon entering Virgo, where it will soon be that full moon total lunar eclipse. It's not there yet, you know. It's Moon has only just recently entered Virgo. Looks like very early in the day Eastern time, but still I do think that's very important. There's this building intensity that's very palpable, and I do think it's strange. Pisces and especially Virgo are not typically, like I said in the intro, they're more having to do with integration, like let's kind of just process everything, let's meditate, let's journal, you know what I mean? That's typically what this axis has to do with. This is different with this type of aspect though, because this is like peak energy for the moon, you know, full moon lunar eclipse. It doesn't get much more intense than that for the moon. And again, we're not there yet, but we're in that vicinity. So yeah, it's I think it's almost like a catch-22, or a contradiction. You know, how is your mental health? I think we're all kind of reaching some kind of culmination with our physical health, our mental health. How are we processing things? I think the cat's kind of out of the bag. Most of us are aware of how if you have poor mental health, it will directly relate to your physical health. Or likewise, if you have really positive, you know, if you're nourished mentally, that's generally going to seep into your physical health as well. So we really, these themes of like the mind-body connection, mental health, physical health, spiritual health, all of these come up with the Virgo Pisces axis. And this is just, I mean, it's so important. I think, you know, if you're tuning into this, you're aware of that on some level. But I really preach it whenever this Virgo Pisces axis gets brought up like this, because this will kind of come to the forefront even more. But anyway, so before, like, as all that's going on, we have this Sun crossing over Saturn at 22 Pisces. So in a weird way, this kind of encapsulates some similar themes to what I was just saying. Sun conjoining Saturn and Pisces. It's basically saying, like, get real with your spirituality, your mental health, your emotional health. You know, Saturn's not playing around with these well, Saturn's never playing around. But Saturn's not playing around with these types of, like, you know, mental and emotional health type issues. You know, Saturn in Pisces is all about that. With Saturn in Pisces for the last basically 2 years, actually I think it's almost 2 years exactly. I believe Saturn entered Pisces in March of 2023. So basically for this past 2 years, I think we've been stressed and we've generally like lacked direction as a collective. But we're going through this soul searching process. Like, you have to go through this kind of void in order to figure out what's real, if that makes sense. Only once Saturn reaches, you know, 29 Pisces and then 0 Aries, that's where we're going to finally have it all click. And we're going to realize, like, okay, we know what we believe in. But you can't get to that point if you don't go through that weird kind of amorphous soul searching phase that is Pisces, that is Saturn in Pisces. So anyway, so that's kind of my take on the larger transit, but these are the themes that come into the picture even more specifically on Wednesday, because Sun is highlighting Saturn, Sun is conjoining Saturn, Sun is actually blinding out Saturn, because that's what it does. So all in all, I think just take care of yourself. I mean, that's good advice for any day, but especially this week and especially Wednesday, I think the consequences, not just the consequences, but what's the positive version of consequences? Like whether you're treating yourself well and whether you're taking care of your health or not, that's going to be the name of the game, especially midweek this week. Because if you're taking care of yourself, doing the right thing, if you're being productive, but also giving yourself time to rest and, really truly loving yourself, you're going to be very much rewarded for that this week. And then likewise, if you're escaping into fantasy, drugs, unhealthy habits, any kind of addiction really, whether that be, not just drugs, but unhealthy food or whatever it is for you, like too much phone time maybe. I know a lot of us, myself included, spend too much time online. Those are going to hit you harder this week is how I would read these. So yeah, just use common sense, take care of yourself, do what's right. You know what's good for you, I think. If you're anyone listening to this, if you're knowledgeable about astrology, you're interested in self-improvement, self-awareness, looking at patterns and learning about these types of things, like you know what's good for you. So use common sense. Okay, Thursday, March 13th. Things are heating up quite a bit. Depending on your time zone, you may even technically have the full moon lunar eclipse very late in the evening. Let's look at that image again real quick. So evening. Yeah, so I guess if you're farther like west of the eclipse, so if you are, in basically the Pacific Ocean, if you're in Oceania or Japan maybe, you'll have this eclipse very late in the evening, or maybe even the west coast of the United States. But basically what's going on today astrologically, we're in the midst of the eclipse. It's the eve of the eclipse, let's just put it that way. So we can all feel it. It doesn't really matter what your time zone is or exactly what hour the eclipse comes to you. You can feel that this huge culmination is happening. It's about to happen. It's basically happening. Let's see here. I'm going to save most of my analysis on the eclipse for Friday, because that's kind of technically when it happens more so. But basically, like, this is going to be, as I always say, a crazy day. I know that's a little bit vague, but I can only half predict things. There is just so much chaos happening. It's going to seem like it comes to you from all directions. I think that would be true for any full moon lunar eclipse, but especially because this is highlighting a mutable axis. Mutable signs are scattered. Even Virgo, which I know comes across so put together, and some people have wondered, like, Virgo seems like a fixed sign because it's so consistent and it likes routine. Yeah, sure, but Virgo is scattered though. Virgo is, it does reach some kind of consensus. It can be stubborn about what it believes in, but what it believes in is based on how it has adapted to tons of information and stimuli that it has perceived and experienced from its environment, if that makes sense. So Virgo, although it may be very rigid at times, especially if you look at it from a more long-term perspective, Virgo is actually very adaptable. It just prefers to adapt slowly, and once it has adapted in a way that it thinks is best, it's going to hold on to that until something comes along that makes more sense. Okay. So my point is, Virgo is scattered more so than it seems, at least to some people. I think Virgo is clearly scattered, but I can also understand how Virgo seems more like put together or rigid from an outside perspective. But my point is, we are highlighting a mutable axis. There's going to be so much changing in so many different areas of our lives. But of course, look to well, we're not quite at the eclipse yet, but you can look to, like, what houses do these, what house is Pisces for you? What house is Virgo for you? I would really look at both houses. It really is an opposition. It's not just about the moon. I pretty much never, I'm challenging myself. Yeah, I would say, especially when it comes to transits, I never look at just the moon on its own. It's always about the moon's relation to the sun, the moon and the sun. So where do Virgo and Pisces fall in your chart? Are they highlighting your ascendant descendant axis? Because that means your identity and how you relate to other people is completely changing. There's some kind of culmination or climax there. There's a tipping point. You've had enough. Like, you've either been focusing on yourself too much, or maybe you've been focusing on other people too much. There needs to be some kind of balance there. The same could be true if, let's say, your IC midheaven axis is being highlighted by this. So let's say you have midheaven in Virgo or Pisces. How is your work home life going? How is that balance there? Are you working too much? Are you spending too much time at home? There's going to be this huge culmination, this huge change there. And you may be pulled in two different directions. You may, if those are your placements, you may feel like there's a huge obligation at work right now, and there's a huge obligation at home, and you have to make a choice. Can you choose one or the other? Can you somehow prioritize both? Etc. But you can look to like which houses are these highlighting for you. Is it the second, 8th house axis? That means it's going to be highlighting your finances and your investments. If it's 3rd, 9th house, it's going to be more about your learning and your connections with other people and society. We talked about 4th, 10th. 5th, 11th is going to be more your personal creativity and your pride, and how that relates to the group, or how that relates to your community. Could have to do with coworkers or online, like social media, things like that. That's where there could be this culmination, change, crossroads, etc. And then lastly would be the 6th, 12th house axis, or 12th, 6th, whichever. Then it's going to have to do more with your duty, so to speak. Like, are you spending too much time alone? Are you spending too much time serving other people? Can we balance that somehow? Etc. But again, for more specific information, just let me know, and I will do my best to assist. But yeah, Thursday is going to be a crazy day. Things are ramping up. I just kind of very briefly outlined all the different ways we can kind of experience this based on how our houses are set up. So keep in mind that like anyone you meet today, they're going through it in one part of their lives or another. So are you, so am I. And that's where things really get crazy when you take into account like all these different experiences that we're having individually. The common thread is that we're all changing. We're all moving up to the next level, so to speak. And on some level, it does have to do with how we are integrating, and as well as our kind of health, our spirituality, etc. Okay, Friday, the big day. Friday, March 14th. I did just explain a lot of the themes of this full moon lunar eclipse, but it is important to recognize that this, in my mind, this is the day for most of us anyway. This is the day where it happens. For most of us, like in, let's say, Eastern North America or Europe, where I believe most of my subscribers are from, this is going to technically happen early in the morning, but this is big enough. Don't get me wrong. I mean, this is big enough. You're going to feel it all day Friday, all day Saturday. All day Thursday, all day Friday, maybe even Wednesday and Saturday as well. Like, this is going to take multiple days. It's really occupying most of the week. But the full moon lunar eclipse does happen technically at 23 Virgo, pretty dang close to the south node. So this is a very intense eclipse. This is why, this isn't a partial eclipse. This is a total lunar eclipse. It's going to be visible for many, many people. Okay, I did discuss most of the themes there. It is interesting though, this full moon lunar eclipse does make a pretty dead on aspect. So the full moon lunar eclipse at 23 Virgo trines Uranus at 24 Taurus, so almost exact to the degree. And so in doing so, you could also say Sun is sextiling Uranus today. So Uranus is forming this really harmonious dynamic with both the Sun and the Moon. It's really kind of partnering with this entire eclipse and supporting it. And anytime an aspect happens, we're kind of channeling in that planet's energies. And with Uranus and Taurus, it's strange. Uranus is always kind of strange, but especially being in fall in Taurus, it's out of place. But since Uranus did enter Taurus back in 2018, over the last 7 or so years, we've seen dramatic changes to our economy, to our finances, to resources and stocks and things of that nature. There have also been many different natural events, natural phenomenon, natural disasters, earthquakes, etc. So these are all very kind of, these are exactly what you'd expect from Uranus and Taurus. So the fact that Uranus is is forming these harmonious aspects, this to me suggests some kind of change with our finances, the economy. Look to where 24 degrees Taurus falls in your chart specifically, because that can represent an area of a breakthrough for you. Even 23 Virgo, where the eclipse happens, that can also represent a huge area of a breakthrough for you. You're figuring things out in these areas. You're realizing something new. Something is just kind of coming to you. Some kind of new awareness, new idea. It's going to be dramatically different depending on what area of your chart these points are highlighting. But in general, I think, the eclipse and Uranus being in earth signs, that, like I said, this could have to do with some kind of natural event, weather event, something of that nature, some kind of change with the economy, or it could have to do with like efficiency and productivity in general. Yeah, pretty much just that. And also just in general, any kind of aspect with Uranus, it just brings about changes in perception, awakening. Could be sudden changes when it comes to like group activity, so like protests, for example, or any kind of community or group. There could be some kind of new group movement or something like that as well. All right, and then on to the next thing. So Saturday, March 15th, Mercury stations retrograde at 9 degrees Aries. It's just so much happening this week. Mercury hasn't really even quite left the conjunction to Venus. They're only a couple degrees apart. But yeah, Mercury does technically come to a standstill today. And like I've said before, this is not something that it's not like flipping a light switch, right? When any planet stations retrograde, it slows down, stops for just a brief moment, and then slowly it starts going backward and building up speed, going, at least from our perception, going in reverse. So that's what's happening when it comes to the information. Also just kind of the rhythm, like how we do errands, how we short distance travel and communication, things like that. Technology, as many people observe with Mercury retrograde. All of these things are gradually shifting direction today. And that's why this becomes so dysfunctional, because our work schedules don't allow us to kind of factor in these astrological cycles. We have to do whatever we have to do today, most of us, and for the next following couple of weeks. It doesn't matter that Mercury and Venus are retrograde. It doesn't matter that we just had an eclipse. We have to fulfill our obligations, most of us. So that's where it becomes so dysfunctional. Ideally, this would be a time to rest, to retreat, go figure things out, go take a break. You know what I mean? I really wish we could observe these transits and kind of orient our holidays and our days off around these, because that would be so cool. We could avoid so much of this frustration and dysfunction that we always see with Mercury retrograde, or with retrogrades in general. But yeah, this would be a great time to retreat, maybe work less hours, and just do things that allow you to kind of think about things, process things. We're processing so much. I mean, there's so much new energy. There's these huge new waves of energy hitting us all. So yeah, even if you do have to work or be very productive right now, I would say, can you do something that's slower or methodical in nature? Even, I know this isn't a sexy idea, but even household chores, like cooking, gardening, laundry, whatever it is for you. I think most of us have one chore that we kind of don't mind doing that is somewhat relaxing. That's going to be so key right now. Or journaling is even better, honestly. Spending time in nature, even working out, that would be really great for Mercury and Aries, doing something physical that allows you to just zone out for a freaking second and not be thinking about everything. You know what I mean? Having this super focusing on all these details and working and talking, and that's great. That's just not what this energy is supporting right now. Go for a walk, chill out, either alone or maybe with someone very close to you that you can relax with. That's what this energy is supporting, and that's what will continue for the next few weeks with Mercury retrograde as well. Quick side note: Moon did enter Libra technically on Friday, so right after that full moon lunar eclipse. Actually, much later in the day, Friday, Moon enters Libra. Moon in Libra would typically be very calm, very peaceful, probably more so than any other transit. But this is not the case, especially for today. For Saturday, I just mentioned Mercury stationing retrograde at 9 Aries. Moon happens to reach 9 Libra just before noon Eastern time, and it makes an opposition to Mercury retrograde. So that puts even more stress onto this like recent change in the energy. It's not aligning with how we're feeling emotionally. Like, I think with Moon in Libra over the weekend, we're wanting peace and stability. We're wanting to just chill out. Mercury retrograde is also supporting that. But these two placements are they're opposing, they're at odds with each other. They do want to rest and reflect, but in completely different ways. You know, Mercury and Venus, for that matter, too, are focusing more on the self and individuality and, you know, what do I want? What's good for me? Moon in Libra shows that emotionally we're more wanting peace and harmony with everyone else. And, you know, fundamentally, those two things generally are at odds. Can a compromise be made? Sure. But that's kind of the whole point. That's what we're processing this weekend. Yeah, and that really continues on Sunday. I do think Sunday is going to be slightly less intense than, honestly, the entire rest of the week. Sunday's astrology does look very similar to Saturday, but the difference is we're one day farther from that full moon lunar eclipse, and also Moon is no longer opposing Mercury and Venus like it was on Saturday. Moon does oppose Chiron today, though, so that can bring about its own weirdness. It's not going to be quite as acute as the oppositions from Saturday, but it will still bring about issues of self-expression, deep feelings, you know, things from the past. This is the day of like, oh, you're bringing up shit from the past type of thing. You know what I mean? That's going to be happening on Sunday. In its best form, Sunday looks like a great day for having some deep conversation, saying to a loved one like, hey, you know, I know this was a while ago, but, you know, it's been on my mind, and I really hope that we can talk about this. You know what I mean? Like, there could be really great conversations that are facilitated today. On the other hand, this could be a day where issues from the past are brought up, and they might not be so welcomed. It's like, oh, feelings from the past are coming up again. How inconvenient, right? I mean, I think that's true for many reasons. Mercury and Venus retrograde are focusing on the past, but also this opposition to Chiron. Chiron is about, you know, these deep like wounds that we carry, deep trauma. So, in other words, like, to kind of sum it up, Sunday is slightly less intense, but keep in mind we're still in the midst of eclipse season. We're actually in between the two eclipses now, and then also there are, you know, there's the two retrograde. Like, it's less intense compared to the rest of the week, but this entire week is intense compared to like any other week of the year. So it just depends on how you slice it. Sunday is like kind of the only rest we can get for the week astrologically before things will ramp up as we go a little bit later on throughout the rest of the lunar cycle. But yeah, that's what I have for you for this week. Next week, things continue to change pretty dramatically. Sun is going to make some pretty funky aspects at the end of Pisces before it enters Aries, which is very exciting. We're going to have that spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, and we'll have a third quarter moon really shake things up in a really powerful way next week as well. So anyway, I hope all that helps. I really hope that helps you. I hope you have a great time this week. I know it can be stressful. It can be so overwhelming. But on the other hand, this can be a great opportunity to bring about exactly the change that we've been needing, wanting, hoping for, etc. So I'm excited, and I hope you are too. But anyway, hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next week.